All right, everyone. We will begin with our webinar for today. Um, Welcome to the second webinar that we have for the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia for the year 2019. Our webinar is part of a campaign called Spread the Love, and we're basically working to sensitize medical students and the general population about what it means to be a part of the LGBTQ plus community and how to be more sensitive future healthcare professionals or just human beings. So today's webinar is the second webinar. The first webinar that we have was on the basics of sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sexual characteristics. Um, the the Right. So that's the first webinar that we had, and the second webinar that we're doing today is more about discussing the homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia that exists in society and addressing this discrimination. So we'll head right into it. The first thing that we're going to address is what is homophobia. So there's an activist and an author, Audre Lorde, who defined homophobia as the belief in the inherent superiority of one pattern of loving and thereby the right to dominance and the fear of feelings of love for a member of one's own sex and the hatred of those feelings in others. So essentially, it's just a form of discrimination, and it's used to discriminate against those who do not love in the same way as a heterosexual person does. And by love, I mean emotional, sexual, and romantic attraction come under it, of course. So this is like a really it's a word that we use a lot every day when we speak about the LGBTQ plus community and their rights and everything. But it's really important to kind of understand that when we say homophobia, it does not cover every individual under the LGBTQ plus community because we do have other terms like biphobia and transphobia. So we have to question what was the need for these other terms kind of coming up. So we had like the same way how LGBTQ plus is a blanket acronym and it covers so many terms, the same way using homophobia to cover the entire LGBTQ plus community and the discrimination that they experience doesn't really fit. So instead, we came up with terms like biphobia and transphobia, which were more specific. So homophobia, we can use it generally, but we can also use it specifically for discrimination experienced by homosexual individuals. Biphobia, on the other hand, is something that required a specific term for it because it's something that has a very real presence both outside of the LGBTQ plus community as well as inside it. So there's a person, Robin Ox, who says that she calls herself bisexual because she acknowledges that there is the potential to be attracted both romantically and or sexually to people of more than one sex and or gender, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same degree. And that's essentially what it means to be bisexual. But then what biphobia does, and Amy Anze puts this beautifully, is that biphobia says that you don't love. Like homophobia says that the way you love is not equal to the way that I love, but biphobia says that you don't love and I don't, can't, and will not believe in the possibility of the way you love. And basically, what biphobia stems from is that people believe that bisexual individuals are just confused. It's just a phase that, right now you're still kind of figuring out whether you're homosexual or whether you're heterosexual. And like we saw yesterday, these aren't the only two sexual orientations to begin with. But people believe that, having more than one sexual attraction is also not normal, and that these people are kind of, confused, figuring their way out still, and they'll get there and stuff. And this is why the entire bisexual identity gets questioned a lot, and people try to invalidate it and make it seem like it's not a legitimate identity, which is really wrong to people because that's not true. There is the possibility of being attracted to two genders, and we really need to acknowledge that. And unfortunately, what happens is that the bisexual community faces this kind of discrimination, not just from the general population, but also within the LGBTQ plus community sometimes, because a lot of times people who identify as a homosexual also state that, bisexuality is not a real thing, which is why it's sort of like, they face like a multiple level of discrimination, both within their own community as well as outside it. Which is why, so if you see, until about 2, 3 years ago, the day that we're celebrating today, it's called IDAHOTB. It used to be called only IDAHOT, but then the need for the B for biphobia came up because of the realization that, it's not at all covered by the term IDAHOT itself. Then there's transphobia. Now, transphobia is more related to gender identity than the sexual orientation, of course. And transphobia is something that has existed in our society for a very long time. There are a lot of manifestations of transphobia that Molly will discuss later on. But what's really important to understand that are like people who identify as transgender face a very different kind of discrimination than those who identify with non-heterosexual identities, because being transgender in society, especially in an Indian society, where being a transgender female, or more specifically a hijra person, involves you to be more visible in society. Um, Trans people in general, those who have not transitioned entirely, or those who cannot transition entirely or choose not to, are more visible in society as people who, might be cross dressing, or might be taking hormone replacement, or might be wearing makeup and they're not actually female. And all of these things make them easier targets, and so the discrimination and the violence that trans people experience is far greater than those that non-heterosexual people experience, especially in like an Indian setup. Which is why, again, it's really important to acknowledge that transphobia is a separate term of its own, separate from homophobia, was kind of used as a umbrella term until now. Um, Moving on from this point in the webinar, we will use the word homophobia again as an umbrella term, and or just say discrimination to the LGBTQ plus community. But do understand that it's really important to acknowledge that biphobia and transphobia are individual forms of discrimination in itself as well. So what's really important to understand is, where did this all begin? Like, where did we go wrong? And we spoke about a term yesterday, that is heteronormativity. And we also spoke of cisnormativity. So heteronormativity is basically the belief that what is normal is heterosexual, and anything that is not heterosexual is abnormal. The same applies to cisnormativity, which is the belief that anything that is cisgender is normal, and anyone who is not identifying as cisgender becomes abnormal. By creating these so-called normal and abnormal systems in society, we've kind of divided populations and created a lot of negative misconceptions about what it means to be normal and abnormal. And I think at this point, it's really important to step back and question, what is the need for having a normal and abnormal? And in our own ways, each of us can be abnormal, which is why the concept of normality and abnormality is quite bizarre to begin with. The discrimination also stems from a place of ignorance, where a lot of people do not know about what it means to be LGBTQ plus, and therefore are not entirely aware of it's just like it's stuff that we've heard and information that has been passed down, and we're not in ourselves aware of what it means to be transgender or to be non-heterosexual. And it's really important to educate ourselves in this case, rather than let that ignorance kind of breed itself and pass on to future generations. It also comes from a sense of fear, which is again very tied to ignorance, in that a lot of people do not understand what it means to be non-heterosexual or non-cisgender, because that is not something that they experience themselves. Um, and so there's like this fear of the unknown. But again, it's really important to educate oneself and realize that, it's as normal, for lack of a better word, as being heterosexual or cisgender. Also, when we talk about specifically about like the gender identities, non-gender binary individuals and transgender people often are breaking away from the gender norm that the patriarchal systems have set down for us. So, what the patriarchy says is that men, people who are assigned male at birth, are supposed to behave in a particular way. People who are assigned female at birth are supposed to behave in another particular way. And when someone fails to behave in this way that they're supposed to behave, they experience a lot of hate by society. When someone sees that, someone is not behaving in the way that we have been conditioned to believe that a man or a woman should present themselves, and they do not behave in this so-called masculine or feminine way, um, people consider it unnatural. And then people consider that when someone is behaving unnaturally, they can use violence and use force and use a lot of negative forces to kind of control people, to bring them back under these gender norms. And it's really important to question why these gender norms exist. Why does the patriarchal system insist on creating this gender binary and, putting us in these boxes and stuff like that? So that in a way is sort of where all of this hate begins from. It comes from a place of ignorance, from a place of fear, from a place of assuming that certain genders are supposed to behave a particular way and that there is only one normal gender and one normal sexual orientation. And these sort of things really, propagate that stigma even more. So that was the origin of everything. Um, Speaking about the types of discrimination that exist in the world, there are three types. So there's internalized discrimination, there's social discrimination, and there's institutional discrimination. So when we say internalized, it means discrimination at the level of an individual. It's discrimination that we have kind of taken into ourselves from the years of conditioning and the way we were brought up. So, a lot of subtle things, a lot of verbal discrimination, a lot of judgment that we pass in our heads is a lot of internalized discrimination. Now, when it comes to social discrimination, it's more of the discrimination that exists in the society around us, and the way the society tries to control, a non-heterosexual or a non-cisgender individual. And then when we talk about institutional discrimination, it refers to discrimination that exists at the level of institutes, whether legal or educational or otherwise. So now Molly will talk a little bit about how this discrimination manifests in the society around us. So yes, Molly, you can go ahead.
Hello, everyone. This is Molly Mehta, the other national officer for this term again. So, as Shweta explained about the various, discrimination phase, the origin of it, I'll be just, telling you about the manifestations which the LGBTQ community have, them. So, there are various, manifestations. They occur in multiple ways, and it's not always necessary that it occurs, only from one person directly to the other, but it depends on a lot of, it happens in a lot of indirect ways as well. So the first one, from them being the verbal and the physical ones, which we witness most commonly, directly manifested on the other person. We've seen, a lot of cases have been, seen where LGBTQ people are, like, they're called hurtful names, ridiculed, hit, kicked. And there's a national survey which says that 20% of the LGBTQ men are more likely to experience verbal harassment, and 17% are more likely to experience physical and aggressive harassment on the streets. It's a national survey which has been done, and it's very true. Like, the like it's completely like it's completely wrong that it is manifested in such a way, because they're doing nothing wrong. They're absolutely correct in their own way. They're being themselves, and the society is projecting their opinions on them in a very violent manner, in the form of verbal and physical abuse. The other thing, the other manifestation which we commonly see is the social manifestation. So what happens is that, it's a very it's a dilemma in their mind, that what mold do they fit into the society. And that just creates a social pressure, because that just creates a social pressure, of fitting into that mold of the society, and the society is not providing them that mold. So that just, it just makes things complex and affects their mental health a lot. And gradually, it can lead to consequences, such as suicide, about which I'll be talking more in the next in some time. Also, the other thing, socially, what we see is that more likely it's the case that the families reject, the families reject their family member when they find about that, he or she or they are oriented to a different gender identity, like they identify themselves as a part of the LGBTQ. And again, there's this survey that 40% of the homeless youth are LGBT, because due to the rejection from the families, it's very oftenly seen that they're kicked out, and which again affects them a lot in a lot many other ways. Also, also the other thing, what happens is that they don't, because of imagine their own family kicking them out of their own house. So that's because of that, they don't feel a part of anything. Like it's just like they themselves feel that, they're just a extended part of the society, and it's just very hurtful to them as well, because it's it's very inhuman actually. The other aspect, the other manifestations which are there are the institutional and the law manifestation. And the institutional manifestation, it comes under the area where it's not necessary that that person is being, directly affected. Like for example, institutional manifestation is a lot, promoted, and it's prolonged by the law and the legal system. And it will go on till, our law or our legal system does not put specific and stringent laws on decriminalizing it. So, because of, all such manifestations, the LGBTQ community, they hide their personal relationships, they delay their health care, change the way they dress, and they take steps to change their lives. And for what? To not being themselves, to not being who they are. That's why, that's the reason, they have to take such steps. And at the institutional level, it's witnessed in schools, colleges, organizations, big organizations. Just for the saying part of it, we say that, we're not firing that student because he or she or they is a part of the LGBTQ community. Or we say that, we're not firing out that uh, employ because they are part of the LGBTQ community. But the indirect, the unseen harms nobody witnesses. The unseen harm, which is imposed on them, in small incidents. For example, not calling them for some social gathering, looking at them in a different manner. All such incidents are very, it becomes very evident that, you're clearly separating them out. And many young lesbians and gays, they're bullied relentlessly. They wake up in the morning knowing that, before they go to school, to college, to work, they know that their day will anyhow, it's gonna end by them being called hurtful names, ridiculed, hit, kicked. Because, they've decided that, because some people in that social setting have decided that they deserve to be punished. And punished for what? Punished for being themselves. So, they're in a at a very high level, they're ignored, they're rejected, they feel alone, inferior, invisible. And such experiences make them feel that, make that feeling of rejection more like grow stronger and stronger in them, and it just leads to committing suicide, depression, being involved into illegal drugs, risky sex. So the manifestations are really really harmful, which we don't realize. But once we go deeper into it, we see that it's a very very big issue. Moving on. So yeah. So, like, over the past decade, we've seen that the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, the LGBTP people have made significant legal and political gains, all over the world. But still, despite this progress, the law does not, expressively prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in various fields, in fields like employment, housing, access to services, and so many other areas. So, like, I'll just support this by giving an example. So there was this campaign, in the United States, which was called Beyond You. And there, they like they conducted this campaign after the legalization of gay marriage. And the main agenda of this campaign was that legalizing gay marriage is just the beginning. It's just the beginning of, making making law right towards the LGBTQ, and it's just not the end. Many people, think that by taking such huge steps, by making a concrete law, we're just done by providing justice to the LGBTQ community through law. But that's not the case. During that time, marriage was legal in 50 states, but discrimination was still legal in 31 states. And by saying that discrimination is legal, it's a big big thing, because people just take that as a right. They take, discrimination as a right, that yeah, it is legal, so we have the right to, physically or verbally or socially abuse the other person who is a part of the LGBTQ community. A huge part of, legalization of like non-discriminating the LGBTQ was seen in India when Section 377 came into, and when homosexuality was finally decriminalized. But again, we need to understand that it's not the end. It's just the beginning that you've, started with by providing justice to the community, the LGBTQ community, and there's a long long way to go. That is one thing which people don't realize, and it's really important for them to realize this. Moving on. So, as I said, that legalization of discrimination is a very, it's seen very commonly in various states, and that is supplemented because of the, because of the laws which various countries make. And laws affecting the LGBTQ, they vary greatly, um, they vary greatly across countries, and it's like a spectrum. Like, we discussed various spectrums yesterday, right? Gender spectrum, sexual orientation spectrum. So again, this is like a whole spectrum, which ranges from recognition of same sex marriage to the death penalty for homosexuality. And there's a very recent statistic which says that in 2018, 25 countries, including the developed and the developing countries, they did recognize same sex marriage, Taiwan being one of them. Taiwan, I would just like to add that Taiwan, just 2 days back, it has legalized same sex marriage, and it's the first Asian country to do so. And it's a huge huge step towards providing justice to the LGBTQ. And on the dark side, we see that there are countries who are imposing death penalty for homosexuality. They are, giving death as a punishment for identifying oneself, which is again a very very wrong concept. um Again, there's a very recent example which we've which we have seen in India, that the Madras High Court, it upheld marriage, between a trans woman and a man. And so this signifies that yeah, change is coming, but that change needs to come at a little, at a huge level, so that people recognize with it, and people start following it. And through this, like, through following, through making it more concrete in the law, discrimination at the institutional level, at the social level, that's how the discrimination will decrease. So that's about the laws and the LGBTQ plus. Shweta would like to add another aspect to it. So yeah, Shweta.
Right. So, also, like we've spoken a lot about Section 377 in the past year, and we've heard a lot of discourse about it in India, and we've also heard a lot about, you know, rights for people who express non-heterosexual identities. But one thing that's also been a major point of discussion over the past year is the rights of the transgender people, and a bill known as the Rights of Transgender Persons Bill, which has been going through a lot of amendments over the last few years, and the government has been trying to pass this bill, which is supposed to be for the protection of trans people, but it every amendment that they pass, they never consider the trans people in the drafting of those bills, and so the bills that end up getting drafted often um, are not inclusive and do not, in fact, actually protect the rights of trans people. So it's really important to understand that the laws, even though we're creating them, undermine the rights of the individuals that it seeks to protect. And so, if we want to create truly inclusive laws, it is absolutely necessary that we include trans people and all individuals that the laws pertain to in the legislations that will be passed on their own bodies, so that we pass laws and create laws that avoid fallacies and avoid gaps. Because the only thing that is worse than like passing a law for protecting people is a law that appears to protect people but doesn't really do that, because that would be much, much worse and much, much harmful. So that's really important. Um, Moving on to a more specific part of discrimination that we need to talk about is discrimination in language. So we spoke of verbal discrimination, which is something that a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community go through. Um, we've heard words like gay, chakka, and a lot of other words being passed around to insult people. And it comes from the assumption that being gay or being chakka, as it is an insult in itself. Um, we've got language words that are used as insults and slurs in all of our languages that refer to people of the LGBTQ plus community as in a very derogatory manner. And it's really important to realize that there's nothing insulting about being gay, and to avoid using these words as slurs, because it's really harmful, and it really affects people, because you're talking about their identity, and to speak about them in such an insulting manner is absolutely wrong. Then also in this case, I would like to again bring to notice the word queer that we spoke about yesterday. That queer is like an umbrella term that is used by the LGBTQ plus community, and it actually stems from one such derogatory word, because when queer was used in countries, it came off. It began as an insulting word. So to be gay was to be queer, and that was like and it was a bad thing. And then the LGBTQ plus community kind of reclaimed that word and said that, you know what, yes, we are queer and we're proud of it. And that's what the word queer came from. And again, like why language is so important is because what we're doing when we're saying these words so casually is that we're putting all of these labels and assumptions with our words onto people, and it's quite insulting, because if you can think of a child who might maybe realize that they don't identify as cisgender, and so if like a young boy behaves in a so apparently feminine way, and you use some derogatory language there, those harsh words are being told to a child or are being told to an individual, an actual person, and they can be quite harmful on one's like mental health. So it's really important to understand the power that our words hold and use the correct words and refrain from using these words in a derogatory manner. Another point that is interesting to note is that, especially when we talk about gender, a lot of our language only accounts for the gender binary. So we have words that we have he and she, but we've never really thought of pronouns that someone who does not identify as male or female would want to use. So it's really important to transition from this gendered language to a more gender inclusive language. So by using words like they and other pronouns that people might use, to become truly inclusive of all gender identities, and that's really important. So over here, I would like to I would like to like state a quote that was there by Arundhati Roy in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, which was a book that she's written. So the description is basically about it's the words of a woman. It's a thought of a woman whose child is a hijra. So basically, what the woman is thinking, and she comes from a place where Urdu is the main language, and so she says that in Urdu, the only languages she knew, the only language which she knew, all things, not just living things, but all things had a gender. And we see this in our own language, in Hindi, in a lot of our local languages. Every object has a gender. So some things are male, some things are female. And so everything is either masculine or feminine, man or woman. And everything except for her own child. So, and yes, she knew that there was a word for people who weren't man or women. That's hijra. And maybe even two words, hijra and kinnar. So kinnar is like another societal group of the hijra community. But two words don't make a language. So is it possible to live outside a language? And this is really interesting because at this point you kind of reflect and realize that when someone identifies as a non-binary gender identity, that person is constantly living in a world which wants to define them as either male or female. So our language itself can be so harmful even without any other physical discrimination or any other institutional or social discrimination. So something as simple as language can be so powerful and so harmful at the same time, which is really important to understand. Language in this case becomes a form of microaggression. So what a microaggression essentially is like a very brief, maybe even daily indignity that someone goes through, either intentionally or unintentionally, that is basically intentioned with the purpose that basically has a purpose that communicates a very negative, prejudiced insult towards people. So whenever we use such language, whenever we say, ki, oh, you're so gay, and that person isn't, in fact, a homosexual male, what we're doing is that we're using our language to insult someone, and that's really, really improper. So, discrimination begins with the words that we speak itself. So, it's really important to check ourselves in this place before moving forward and trying to correct the wrong in the world. So, just some examples of language that can be corrected, and there's a lot more, but just a couple of words to kind of give an example. So, for example, we say sexual orientation, we don't say sexual preference, because when we say sexual preference, it implies that there is a choice. And like we discussed yesterday, being LGBTQ plus is not a choice, and therefore it's not something that can be corrected by coercing someone. It is a part of your identity. So it's not a preference, but it's an orientation. The same way, we also discussed, how the word straight can be kind of derogatory because the opposite of straight is crooked or teda, as we discussed yesterday. So it's better to call people as straight people. Better to call people as heterosexual people rather than straight people because it comes from a very like negative place. Also, when addressing a crowd, we always say, hello, ladies and gentlemen, or, good evening to all the ladies and gentlemen present in the room today. But these kind of things can also be very harmful because not everyone in the crowd might be a lady or a gentleman, right? There are people who have non-binary gender identities. So it's better to shift to words that are more inclusive, like everyone. So just say hello, everyone, hello, people. Um, and just stuff like that. Or like even how we start off emails with respected sir/madam. We could just say to whom it may concern because we're opening ourselves to the possibility that the person who we're speaking to might not fit into that gender binary, which is really important. So using gender inclusive language might seem difficult. It might seem difficult to, learn and to correct ourselves, but it's a really vital part of being an ally and working against this discrimination that is so ingrained in us. It might seem like something to be too sensitive about and something that's also not important, but trust me, when the other person over there hears you making an effort or hears you not using these improper terms, it can make a world of a difference. Now, Molly will speak a little bit about the effect that discrimination has in mental health. Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Shweta. So, as we saw the various manifestations, which we see on the LGBTQ community, a very big effect of that is mental health, and people don't realize, that the fear of the LGBTQ community coming out and being discriminated against for sexual orientation and gender identities, it can lead to depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, thoughts of suicide, and substance abuse. And there are very concrete statistics which say that the LGBTQ individuals are twice as likely as heterosexual, which is such a big thing for women, and which is just there because so much of stigma and discrimination towards them. So a really important point, to understand here is that it's not like the um, uh, uh, the mental health disorders which they're suffering from, the substance abuse, to which they're getting addicted. So all this is not because they're part of the LGBTQ. But because of such discrimination, because of the stigma, because of the stigma and because of the discrimination towards them, because of that, there are such bad repercussions to it. And it is like this is also seen, in the LGBTQ community, going for treatment because of such stigma, and like they obviously they face it everywhere, right? So because of such discrimination being faced, it's difficult for them even to go for a treatment, for any mental health disorder which they might be suffering from. And it's like fortunately, there have been great strides made in the made in the last 35 years, and there have been very concrete associations and organizations, which have said that being a part of the LGBTQ, it's not it's not a mental health disorder, and it's not an illness. So that's really important to understand that such concrete organizations have declared this, and still people have that mindset that no, that this person, as he or she, or they're part of the LGBTQ, they're supposedly, supposedly likely to go to a mental health, to a mental hospital. And one more thing which we see is that
Molly, we're
verbal,
losing you
physical,
a bit.
institutional, is that because mainly because of the social preferential system,
Molly, we're losing you a bit.
actually because of the because of the interplay of hello
Yeah, Molly, we can't really hear you much.
hello
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
okay is it fine now? Hello,
Yeah, it's great. Go ahead. Yeah.
hello,
Yeah, go ahead.
is it fine now?
Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for the disturbance. So as I was saying, yeah, so as I am. Hello, hello. Yeah, so as I was saying that a very in a very
Just a second. Hello, I'm so sorry about that disturbance. I'm so sorry about that. Um, just a second. All right. Okay. So just I'll begin again. I'm so sorry about all these technical issues that we're having. So basically, what I was saying is that LGBTQ plus and human rights, right? That's like the last part of our webinar. So it basically kind of it's really important to acknowledge that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Um, the when we say this, this is not something that's just being said. It comes from the Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a landmark document in the history of human rights. But to be completely honest, no one document can kind of sum up human rights in any way. These are things that we see in the world around us, and these are rights that cannot be reduced in any way. They belong to every individual and are theirs to exercise without discrimination at all, on the basis of race, disability, gender, sexual orientation, religion, age, national or ethnic origin, even caste, class. None of that can take away human rights from a person. And these rights, however, are being violated all over the world every day when it comes to LGBTQ plus people. People are still being discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation and on the basis of their gender identity. People are like people are there are so many human rights violations that occur all around us, and it's completely horrible. When we say that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, we have to really learn to understand the weight of those last few words. There cannot be dignity without rights. There cannot be rights without dignity. So it's really important to uphold these values of human rights, which is why it's really important to understand that when we speak about LGBTQ plus issues, it is not a gay issue. When we speak about LGBTQ plus rights, these rights are human rights. They're things that matter and they're things that are important. So it's really important for governments, for institutions, for societies, and for even us as individuals to work to ensure that these rights are not violated. And that is basically the essence of what we were trying to convey with our webinar today. I don't see any doubts in the chat section, so if anyone has any, you can drop them down there. I'm so sorry about the technical issues that happened on the call today. We will definitely make sure that it does not happen again. Thank you so much to those who've kind of been with us through the entire thing. You can drop any doubts that you have under the chat. We'll answer it here, or you can message us on personal chat on the group later on. Since I don't see any, I think that's all for today. I'd really like to thank these amazing resources that we've been through, as well as the Vice President for Exchanges for helping us set up this whole webinar. And we really hope that we were able to spread some information today about homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia, the discrimination that exists in society, and just make a significant difference.